I'm Nate Juraschek. I am the head of product at Telarus. It's B2B to B2B, and there sometimes is another B in there. I've been doing product for about 20 years now. I worked at startups, and I've worked at some large-scale companies too. Sprint and H&R Block are the two big ones, Kansas City-based companies.
What has been your experience when you're using data as storytelling?
I think it gives confidence. How do we celebrate the success? How do we celebrate that we're moving in the right direction? It's actually less hard for me to get people excited about momentum than it is to get people excited about failure.
Do you happen to have anything that you can go, here's an example where we changed our mind or we went a different direction because the data told a different story?
For me, some of my favorite parts of the data telling a different story is when it challenged my own assumptions. It's when I find that I was wrong that I'm most excited, because then I've learned something and I'm moving in another direction.
Nate, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm excited to have you introduce yourself because we've known each other for a little while, but the audience might be new to you. So why don't you do a real quick introduction to who you are and what's your story?
Yeah, thanks, George, and thanks for having me on the podcast. Excited to be here. I'm Nate Juraschek. I am the head of product at Telarus. It's a very interesting company that you all should look up. It's B2B to B2B, and there sometimes is another B in there. So it's a pretty unique model. But yeah, so I've been doing product for about 20 years now, being in the digital product space. So I started off putting music on cell phones. So I used to listen to popular music and, updating myself a little bit. But I used to listen to music and then program MIDI. So the original ringtones that weren't even sounding like the actual song. But then eventually I got into real ringtones. So the things that actually were MP3 files, AAC files, all that kind of thing. And that just grew to putting music on cell phones. So launched multiple music products for different companies, from Verizon to Sprint. And then I just, I started falling in love with digital products at that point. Like, I actually didn't go in there to do digital product. My background was in, I thought I was going to be a filmmaker. So, but I happen to have this skill of, being able to listen to music and, program ringtones, and then just found out there's this whole world of digital products. So got majorly into digital products. So I worked at startups, and I've worked at some large scale companies too, mostly helping on the digital transformation side, but always in like the digital product space. So Sprint and H&R Block are the two big ones, Kansas City based companies. And then, otherwise, most of the companies I've been in are more in that scaling phase of still figuring it out, getting it together, establishing product in some cases, like the product discipline. And so it's been a great ride. So
I'm curious, go back to the filmmaking roots. What do you think you could take from the idea, even if you didn't go into actually learning it, but the idea of becoming a filmmaker? Where are there parallels or crossovers into the world of product that you now live in?
Oh, for sure. So the reason I got into filmmaking is I was really excited about creating experiences and seeing people react to it. So ultimately, as a product person, we are creating experiences for users. And it's, in some cases, it's cooler for us because it's more intimate in that we're trying to solve problems for them too. So not only might we get a reaction that gives that sort of delight moment, which I think is a lot of fun, but we're also taking away the pain or the friction or whatever of the different things that they need to accomplish. So I really liked creating experiences. And if you're in any sort of filmmaking or theater background, it's building stuff. It is building a production. You have deadlines, you have to plan, you have all sorts of constraints you have to manage too. And so all those skill sets just made a lot of sense inside of the product world. But the other side of it, as you probably know, that we're doing so much stakeholder management that we have to tell stories constantly around what it is, what we're building, get buy-in from all the stakeholders. And so all those skills have helped me over time. So.
I love that, because not only was I a technology nerd growing up, I was kind of a theater kid as well. So that crossover, and I really wanted to go into not movie making, but I wanted to go into stage production. Yeah. So everything from lighting and sound. And I almost went to Full Sail University, which was the mecca for that kind of work, right?
I was
this
looking
close.
At that, yeah.
But it was very expensive.
I was actually a theater major because I decided I had actually done a little bit of work with NBC and had been doing video
Oh,
work in high
cool.
school and that kind of thing. But then I was like, I want to be classically trained. That's what I
Yeah.
decided. So
Yeah.
theater
Yeah.
major, got into theater too. So it's great.
Amazing. Okay, cool. All right. Well, that we had to take the conversation a different direction. So let's okay, dovetailing from early days of turning songs into MIDI, which I love, by the way. And actually, I feel like there's kind of a resurgence of a little bit of people playing with that technology again. It's now kind of become retro, but it's become definitely this thing that people are interested in doing.
Yeah.
What was the journey like for you, specifically when it comes to how you interacted with the teams around you? So I would love to know, like, as you went from kind of different places to different places, whether it was at the telecommunications companies you were at and you were putting these songs on devices,
Hmm.
what was it like to be working with other stakeholders, with other collaborators at each of these places, and especially some of these companies being massive enterprises down to the startups that you're working on? What did the teams look like as you started to work through those different environments?
Yeah, I'll start a little bit on the ringtone side. So there we were a vendor, right? So the big folks we were
Yeah.
playing with are Verizon, Rogers, eventually Sprint, and that kind of thing. And a lot of what we were building to was based off of course, what they were interested in buying, but also their influence on what was popular. So
Mm-hmm.
we had our own set of programming, what we thought was popular from a music perspective, and we collaborated with all the record labels. But at the same time, knowing that you have a large account holder or account manager on the big client side, we're constantly in conversation with them, and ultimately, we were serving them for what we need to do. Like they
Yeah.
owned
Yeah.
the real metrics at the end of the day.
Yep.
But at the same time, we were using data to manage some of those conversations as well. So meaning, like, if they were taking it in another direction, we say the data helped or it didn't help, and we really had to use that to manage the decisions that were being made. So that's where things kind of started at. And then I actually moved over to Sprint after launching Sprint Music Plus, and then it became all about digital transformation.
Yeah.
And so that team makeup was very different. I went from like a startup size kind of group to Sprint had over 200 people in their digital department
Wow.
for all sorts of different things, from managing the website to the app to all the different metrics to merchandising that went with it. So
Oh, sure. Yeah.
just a really big group. So it was kind of culture shock for a minute to go from we just figure it out and we get it done. And I have to use data a little bit to storytelling, to then there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen and there's a lot of stakeholder management once I was inside of Sprint with that many people.
How did you find the data, or how did you use the data to help both with storytelling and decision making in those environments?
So, in several of the places that I've been, one of the first things I do is to make sure that we've instrumented as much of the data as we can that makes it very easy to get answers whenever I need it.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
the way that works in the latest environments, I'm using data platforms that are more auto tagging based. So I can get to an answer very easily, and I don't need a group of people in order to figure out what's the data, have the full strategy around it, tag everything perfectly, and move forward. But if I go back to those, like the days at Sprint and or H&R Block, there's a lot of people who are managing just the data itself, making sure that it's tagged right, that we have visibility into what we need. And so my goal in almost all those places is, of course, to have what are our key objectives, that match the strategy, and make sure that those are tagged. But on top of it, that if I have a question and I'm curious, that I know how to get to the answer and that the data is there when I need it. So usually that's full visibility into all the things our customers are doing, and then the second part is the attributes of the customer, because
Mm.
it's not just a raw number at the end of the day, like, hey, did we get everybody through the system? But people are very different when you get down to the detail level. So being able to tease out segments, being able to tease out anything from demographic info to intent data, like that just starts to really add to the richness of, at the end of the day, as product managers, we're just making decisions, right? So the faster we can get to the learning, answer our questions, and influence the stakeholders with something objective through data, the better and faster we're moving towards hitting our goals, I think. So
Yeah, I think it's really good. So I'm kind of curious. You mentioned a couple things there. One is that the data is a tool for curiosity.
Hmm.
Go a little further into that, because I think that curiosity is something that we both kind of can riff on for a little while about the if we don't have I'll refer to data sometimes as just context,
Hmm.
right? I need context about why is this happening, or what could happen, or what has happened before, and how are we informing how we move forward, right? This is, like you said, these are all the decisions, but it's because I'm curious about either how we make it better, how we make it more entertaining, more useful, more problem solving. So talk a little bit about where you have seen data, you know, be able to feed into that curiosity.
Yeah. Well, so that goes back to that kind of data strategy comment I just made. Because, like, at a normal level, most places I've been, they'll have their most important business metric measured, like how
Mm-hmm.
many widgets am I selling, right?
Right. Right.
And then you get a level beyond that, which is that they're thinking about things like conversion. People who look like they wanted to buy a widget, did they actually get to the widget that they're buying? And so it's not uncommon that I'll find people have these like really straightforward basic metrics. But for me, there's the why underneath of all of that. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so there are people who
Mm-hmm.
wanted to get a thing and some people didn't get the thing. What happened in between? And so that's where that other richness of data, if I've got all the tagging that, or just visibility into what their journey was like, that I can start seeing them do things like, oh, they went to this area that we didn't think to measure, but they're all going over there. What's happening over there? But on top of that, it's not just sort of quantitatively, there's a number of people who fell out and, a chunk of them ended up going to the desktop because you didn't have it on your mobile phone. The other
Sure.
thing is like watching replays and that kind of thing. So I'm a big fan of experience analytics that allow me to, without necessarily having to connect with the customer, to watch what they actually did, because I really can sort of see the story behind how they're clicking, how they're moving around on a page, that kind of thing. Uh, so at a basic level, I always start with that quantitative type metrics and making sure I get as many of it that I can explore. I can ask questions and the data is there when I need it. But then the other side is getting that like qualitative view that allows me to watch a replay to see what the story was, and or at when the data is amazing, I can actually reach out to the person. I'm like, oh my gosh, what the heck were they doing? I actually have the data. It says who was doing a thing. Can I find out why they were doing it and dive into it? So,
Where's the balance between data and gut? So this is something that our team talks about a lot, actually. Is there's sometimes where you go, I have a gut feeling this is the way we should go. And what's really frustrating is when I've worked with entrepreneurs or other product managers or even stakeholders or product owners inside of companies, and I could go like, well, the data doesn't exactly say that. And they're go, I know, but my gut says it. And sometimes they're right. I mean,
yeah,
like sometimes, and I think that the way that I try to spin that is your gut might be saying it, but what I actually think you're doing is saying, I have a hypothesis that there's a different set of data that might be true.
yeah.
And I'm curious how you balance that, how much you balance I'm going to make all my decisions based off of just pure data versus I also have some assumptions, some hypotheses, some guesses that I want to validate or I want to test to see if they're true.
Yeah, I mean, there is a danger with overusing gut-driven development. But there's also to that point a fallacy of totally being data-driven and not letting yourself take risks or think outside of the
Yeah.
box for what those things are. Because even at your best, when you're looking into the quantitative data or you're looking at the qualitative data, you still might not have all the answers or the ability
Yeah.
to completely get inside of the customer's head. So for me, it's about speed of decision making. So
Mm,
if I can get to an answer that helps prove or disprove something quickly, I'm using it directionally to help try to make a decision. I still may disagree with
yeah.
it. The ultimate way that I can figure out, though, whether or not it's successful is all the way at the end, finally building a thing, deploying it, and doing an A B test to actually see, when I introduce this to the environment, is it causing the effect that I think it's going to cause?
It's really
So,
good.
and then of that, like once you are actually deploying the thing you believe in, if you have the data there enough to ask the questions about the learning of that experience, you can figure out why it won. Because I feel every decision is a building block. Because you're going to make a decision, you're moving to this, I learned a thing, now I know what my next step is. Now I know what I shouldn't do in the future, and it just keeps shaping future decisions. So
Let's take a break to tell you about our sponsor this week, Crema, a design and technology consultancy. At Crema, we know that navigating through periods of rapid change and scaling can be daunting. Broken systems, misaligned teams, delivery delays, and gaps in customer engagement are just some of the challenges that can arise when growing like this. That's where Crema steps in. Crema acts as a trusted partner, helping you overcome these hurdles on your journey to becoming a tech-enabled organization. Crema is excited to announce 3 new services designed to empower your product teams. You may have heard of the product triangle: design, product, and technology. Well, we're excited to help you navigate all 3. First is our UX audit. This isn't just a review, it's a deep dive into the user experience to uncover transformative insights that serve as a blueprint for greater success. Next is our team assessment. This service helps you identify the strengths and gaps in your product team, arming you with the knowledge to excel. And finally, a code quality assessment. It's essential to ensure that your technology is not just working, but thriving. Our experts will enhance your code base to improve performance, security, and scalability. Ready to get the most out of your existing product teams? Visit crema.us today and learn how Crema's new services can help you navigate your biggest challenges. Now back to the show. For those that might want to nerd out a little bit or even get into the kind of specifics, how are you collecting that data? So it could be the way that you think about the tooling that you're putting into place, or you might be thinking about data in different ways. So you said, I might not only want to see just the metrics of kind of analytics of what was clicked, how many times that was clicked, the path they went, but also I kind of want to see what were they doing? Can I watch them? Can I see it? How do you go about collecting the right kind of data when, I mean, the options for data collection are limitless, but what are some of your favorite tools? What are your favorite approaches to how to collect the right kind of data?
Yeah. So I always start with that quantitative data because you need to know what the business metrics are. And even at like a logging level, people need to know how many things I sold because of, accounting and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, and everything there is like Adobe Analytics is sort of the Ferrari of data that you can get to. The problem there being that a lot of it still requires a whole team of people to tag things for you to have visibility. It doesn't auto capture. But Adobe Analytics is the best, the cheapest, and how most people run is Google Analytics. I just find Google Analytics to be very lacking when I get into curiosity. It's missing too many things, and it's very hard for me to get to framing something into the story. It just ends up feeling too numeric to me, not journey based.
Yeah.
But lately I've been using more of they're not startups anymore, but like Heap is a big one. So Heap I love because it does auto capture of most of your analytics. There are still things you have to instrument, but it's one of the fastest and best that I've used. But there are others out there. There's one I've just started to play with a little bit called LogRocket and that kind of thing. But it's really where those quantitative and then replay tools start coming together. So like most of these places, they started either on the quantitative side or they started on the replay side and worked their way backwards. So the replay tools are things like Content Square is a big one in space. There's something that used to be called Tea Leaf. Now it's called something different. LogRocket is one that's out there. So there's a whole, and Full Story is one that I've used a lot recently that does both quantitative and qualitative, but really was still, again, an auto capture tool. The replays are still probably the most valuable thing that it has. So connecting those things together. And then the last thing that I haven't talked about a lot, but I go in more depth on a post on my LinkedIn, is around NPS. How do you get to somebody giving a little thought behind what their experience was like? So when you connect the dots of all of these things together, I get CSAT scores or NPS scores, depending on what we're looking for, the quantitative data, and then the qualitative. So like if somebody said, I saw an error, I can see people falling out through the quantitative conversion flow. Can I get into what error did they see? And you watch the replay and you're like, oh, now I know. I have my answer. Move forward, fix that. Let's keep making this experience better. So, and then of course on the NPS side, there's a ton. So it's Qualtrics and Medallia as the big players, but
that's really good. I think it's helpful because sometimes people go, I know I need to be doing this, but I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
So I think maybe, okay, we talked a little bit about tools, but where do you suggest, or where do you encourage people to say, if you're just getting started in kind of your data journey,
Hmm.
whether it's collecting it or making decisions based off of it, where do you say, I know you can't do all, like you just listed 15 different tools there.
For
That's a
sure.
lot. And but you have the kind of underpinnings of saying, I know how they can work in concert together. I know that where the gaps are that I can fill in, that I need this other tool just because it only does that one thing. It
Yeah.
kind of goes back to like the film days. It's like, I know this camera is going to get the shot I want, this lighting setup, the 3-point lighting or whatever.
For sure.
Where can someone say, if they just even as simply as this, where would be someplace that they would start in their
I
journey?
mean, most startups that I would talk to these days, I would say check out Heap. They have a free tier. You can jump right
Yeah.
in, put it on top of it, and their training is decent enough to get you going, and it's flexible enough to be dangerous. And it includes a replay tool now too, so
Yeah,
you
right.
can actually go right from quantitative to the replay component. So that's what I'd say to start
It's a
with.
good place to
So
start. Okay, that's good. Do you have any examples or any stories where you were trying to figure out what to do next or what the changes were that needed to be made, and the data really did tell the better story, that you were able to kind of say, I can defend that we ought to do this, without maybe getting into like the true underground, but you happen to have anything that you can go, here's an example where we changed our mind or we went a different direction because the data told a different story.
yeah, I mean, for me, some of my favorite parts of the data telling a different story is when it challenged my own assumptions. Because I also
Mm.
think that I'm right a fair chunk of the time. I think
I'm
my
sure
gut
you
is
are. I'm
usually
sure
right.
you are.
So, no. But that said, I know, it's when I find that I was wrong that I'm most excited because
Yeah,
then I've learned something and I'm moving in another direction. So, an example of that is I worked at a startup recently, and our main experience was for our customers was an app-based experience.
sure.
And I had a hypothesis that there's a chunk of our customers that really wanted a website. That they didn't want to go to the app. They either didn't want to download it. Now there's strategy components around that in terms of like we really wanted to drive people to the app for the stickiness and all that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But sometimes people just want a website or expect there to be a website. So I did a combination of techniques. So I did what's called a painted door technique. So I put a login button at the top of the screen. We did an A/B test on that because I was also just trying to see when I do this, what is the effect of introducing a login button. But then I wanted to see how many people actually clicked on it. And so after they clicked on it, of course, I said, hey, we actually don't have a website experience yet. The way you do this is on the app. Make that journey as seamless as possible, because I know there's definitely a group of folks out there that are like, that's the worst ever. You should never do this type of thing because the user experience is so awful to be like, hey, sucks to be you. We don't actually have this feature yet, that kind of thing. But there's still a way to elegantly hand
Yeah,
off to
yeah.
what their solution actually is, and then ask them a little bit of information, like, why were you here? What was it that you were expecting to find? And instead of finding out that we needed, to build the website or to have all of the features that I thought, it really helped carve out. There's a narrow group that's very interested in this, and the kind of use case they're looking for is very desktop focused in the sense of, they need a bigger screen or that kind of thing. So it
Mm-hmm.
just allowed us to reshape, should we build the same thing we have over there into, no, we don't have to build the same thing we have. We could get just some of these small use cases out as a step forward and then keep learning. So
That's a good example. I remember years ago we were working on a product for Kauffman Foundation here in town,
yeah,
and they were building these startup competitions. And they had tens of thousands of potential participants, and we launched the site, we got it up and running, and what we found was like no one was registering or no one was applying, even though they all said they wanted to. And the funny thing is we started doing some testing and looking at the data, and what we quickly figured out was that the login button, the like start now button, was
yeah,
actually too big. It looked like a banner ad, and they all thought it was like promoting something else, that it wasn't actually the like very simple, I just need to log in to get started. Now this was early days of kind of testing UX and getting feedback on it, but it
yeah.
was just simply making the button smaller. I mean, like that's all we had to do. And then all of a sudden it was like night and day. of tens of thousands of people signing up and participating in these competitions.
So you
And
saw people weren't clicking on it,
yeah,
and was your hypothesis that it was too big, or how did you all
no, we
figure
had
out
no
that it was
idea.
too
We
big?
really honestly didn't know, because we're like, do we need to make it bigger? Like, how do we make it flat? Maybe it needs to flash, or something was just
Yeah,
like, how do we make it very clear?
yeah,
And we started looking at kind of the path, and they were going off looking for where to register. You could see they were going to like about or learn or how or whatever. And then we didn't have good paths to get them back to that. Ultimately, we ended up reaching out to a few of the folks that we knew should have been participating in some way. And we said, well, why didn't you just register to sign up? They're like, where's the register button? And we went, are you kidding? It's the biggest thing on the screen. And then, oh no, we thought that was like an advertisement for something else. And so it was a small tweak that ended up getting massive results. So
that's
yeah,
huge.
very, very simple things sometimes to get, but you learn quickly by saying, okay, well, let's look at the data, both qualitative and quantitative, and make decisions from that. It's really good.
Well,
Um,
and that you knew who your customer was, so you could get
yeah.
back to asking a person, getting to, real people and the why to help you do your
Yeah.
next problem solve. So I think that's great.
What has been your experience when you're using data as storytelling? There's one thing to say it's making you as a product manager or product owner, the giving you the confidence in the decisions you think should happen. How does that data inform how you interact with the rest of the team, whether it's the development team or the design team or maybe stakeholders inside the organization from a business perspective or sales perspective? How does data inform the story across the rest of the team?
One, I think it gives confidence because
Ooh, yeah.
there's definitely trust when you've got stakeholder management, and hey, I tend to make good decisions or I make bad decisions, and you just see people build up their trust over that over time.
Yeah.
I get into a lot more stories around it kind of doesn't matter. Like, what's more important is that we get to our objectives, right? So how do we celebrate the success? How do we celebrate that we're moving in the right direction?
Yeah.
It's actually less hard for me to get people excited about momentum than it is to get people excited about failure, which is that
Ooh.
we learned we shouldn't do a thing, and now we're not going to invest 6 months in doing this item because we learned it didn't work over here.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
That's tough. That's a hard thing, because again, where people say fail fast, but like very few people actually lean into because it's an ego thing. I actually just
it
posted something
is.
about this on LinkedIn today. It's like it's an ego thing that says we actually don't want to look wrong, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and people take it personally too. Like, don't tell them that we just spent 3 months figuring out we were wrong. Like, that's a horrible
Mm,
thing to do. And it's like, no,
mhm.
we need to
That's a
share
good
that.
thing.
We need to
Yeah.
like pass the learnings on so that they don't do that over here too. So,
Hmm.
but the flip side of that is like celebrating risk taking, which is like, um, so like I don't think anybody enjoys failure. Like, look at all the
No,
places
no.
we screwed up. But it's much more like, hey, we need to push the envelope. We took a risk here, and not all of our
Yes.
risks are going to work. So we expect some of these to fail, but in that, we will find a few of these things that just move the needle. So,
It's really good. I did an exercise recently that I hadn't done before. I was brought into, we were working with a partner, and the leader who had been around for a long time in the industry, worked as a VP of like digital at Coca-Cola and been a CIO of a big, construction engineering firm. He took us through a process where it was actually like, let's list all of our risks, like
mm,
actually name them now, talk about how do we describe them, talk about where we might see them, and then talk about what would be their impact if they were true,
yeah,
and then what would be the mitigation of how we would handle that risk being true or false, right? So, and then
I love that.
almost every meeting we have together, he brings it back up and he says, where are we at on these risks? Are these still risks for us? And some of them we go, you know what, honestly, it's not really a risk anymore. We now know where we're at with that, and we know how to move forward past that. Great. Okay, take that off. That's gone away. But there's maybe new risks that get added to the list. Is there anything else that we should be worried about or thinking about right now? And honestly, when we first started the exercise, I was like, why are we focused so much on the negativity? Right. And it ended up being like, oh no, this is a great way of framing where we can innovate, where we can seek data, where we can look to learn. Which I was really impressed by the exercise now.
No, I love that. There is the way I usually frame it up is there's certainly risks that we should be capturing and mitigating. And a lot of those risks end up being like project risks too. It's
Yeah,
like, well, we
sure.
know we've
Yeah.
got scope and whatnot. But the other side is assumptions. These are all of our
Hmm.
assumptions, get them out there. Which of these assumptions do we have that what are ways we can validate these assumptions without
Yeah.
having to get all the way to we just move forward with it, you know? And
Yeah,
that is that
totally.
combination of data, or could we test it, or could we do a quick prototype and have somebody click on it, or uh, and there's not always an infinite number of ways to test and whatnot, but you at least just get to like, how can we ask questions and get information faster than having to build for 6 months to figure it out.
It goes back to that curiosity and context that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
That is really, really powerful. Okay. As people are thinking about using data to inform their decisions, they're thinking about how to either better know their user or better communicate and collaborate with their stakeholders and their peers. Where are there ways that people are like, their intent is good, they know they want to do it right, they know, they installed Heap, they're looking at Google Analytics, which no one really knows how to use now since its GA4 came out, but then
Yeah.
all these things that their intent is good, but they're just kind of missing the mark, right? They're just missing how they could best use that, or they're missing how that they could best implement that process into making better decisions. Where do you think people get it wrong?
So assuming that they said, hey, we need to use data, which is one of the first fallacies I
That
hope
is a huge
people
assumption,
figure
right?
out.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah,
need to
for
use
sure.
data, and hopefully most people are using data to make decisions, at least for digital purposes. But the next one is like being ready to ask the questions and learn from that data. So it's
Mm.
like, hey, we would just know whether or not we're moving the needle, but do you know what you're learning from the data and that you can ask questions to it in some way? How are you going to get to the second answer? And that's the things like enriching the data a little bit with actually, it's a segmentation thing. These are prospects versus these are already your existing customers. Of course, they weren't buying. Can you figure that out and partition that out? And then can you ask the next level question? So usually that's it for me, and getting into like the qualitative component, which is, I think it's awesome when they get to quantitative, but if you don't have the ability to quickly get to why,
Mm.
then you're still just kind of spitballing and getting back into, okay, well, we'll build another thing based off of an assumption that we actually could get past that assumption pretty quickly if we could just see what they were doing. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Ideally, if I could just talk to them,
or
right?
talk to them. Exactly.
Right.
So,
That's a crazy idea. Yeah.
which in B2B, I love, like we just know our users really well. So it's
Yeah.
so much easier for me to be like, oh, here's the top 5 people using this feature. I'm going to go talk to them. So,
It's one of the reasons I love that Crema focuses so much on building products mostly for internal teams.
yeah,
Which is really fun because for the most part, you're given permission to go like, well, yeah, go talk to them. They're right there.
go
And it's
talk to
like,
them.
okay, cool. And
Yeah,
the team might be 5 people. It might be 1,000 people. It doesn't really matter. It's a little less risk to talk to the employee group than it is to talk to, a potential marketplace of buyers. Right. So that's a different thing, but,
totally.
okay. And then looking ahead, I'm curious, that lots is changing in our marketplace and in our world and in technology. But what's getting you excited as you look at the horizon for both yourself, for your industry, for your current company that you're at? What's getting you excited looking at the horizon?
It's probably cliche to say AI, but there is a lot going on with AI that has got me excited, because
Yeah.
what I don't love about anything from product management to project management is like the drudgery, the tasks, or the hiccups to figuring out answers that we should have been able to get to faster. And so what I love about at least the promise of AI, but I've seen some of this bear itself out, is getting to answers faster. So,
Mm-hmm.
in coding, it might be like, what's the exact code I need to do to solve this one thing? And it helps
Yep.
with the coding. Or in other cases, like AI in the analytics world is actually really interesting, because you're like, hey, there's 2 different segments doing 2 very different things. AI, can you tell me what you're seeing to explain why this A/B test is failing? And then it's going to be able to get to an answer. It's like, oh, people weren't scrolling down the page enough on this one experience versus the other to see that, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, which all of it leads back to our ability to make great experiences for our customers faster and do more things. So I love the impact. I love seeing experiences come to life and delighting customers. And, if it's not just, well, we just had to, get those TPS reports done. That's a good thing. So.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I completely agree with you. I think that's the area that I'm most excited. I mean, you talked about it a couple of times that you have to both collect the data, clean the data, tag the data. But when you start to see AI go, I can do a lot of that for you because I can see the trends that you can't see fast enough. Then you go, okay, cool. And help me to create insights. Now I still need to discern those insights, right? I need to decide what we are going to do as human beings with those insights, which I think the only constraint that I see, and human beings are a lot more adaptable than I give them credit for, but is our ability to change fast enough. Mm-hmm. Meaning, like, I think that the AI could tell us, change this, move here, make this. This is the data you need. It will be our ability to say, well, we're willing to adapt that fast.
No, and that's actually a great call out because AI is trained on us. Yes. So it's also has the potential to reinforce biases. So like to see, how we can play with AI to prompt better, like challenge my assumption. Can you start a prompt with that and then put your assumption out there? And it's like, no, you need to think about this differently. That would be cool. I mean, I haven't tried that prompt, but I'm spitballing.
I have tried that prompt. It is fun. It's a good exercise. If you go in saying, I want you to debate me on this.
Yeah.
And actually ask it to debate. Now, early versions, I did this more back in like GPT 3.5 and 4. So maybe it's gotten better, but I will say 4 or 5 prompts back and forth. And it's kind of like, hey, I'll do whatever you want to make you happy. And so it always tries to come to this common denominator spot, which is, if it's trained on us, it's kind of what we as people tend to do, right? We're just trying to like, hey, I just want everybody to get along. Well, in some circles, we want that to be true. So no, I think that's really exciting. I am also very excited for where this can go. And I think how it can make us, equip us to build better tools, like you say, create better experiences for folks.
That's right.
It's a really good way to say it.
And I hope in all these industries where there's still just these drudgerous or horrible experiences, that's where we can start getting more momentum.
It's about time. That digital transformation. People say that we're past the digital transformation age. Not yet. There's still a long ways to go, in my opinion.
Yeah. I took my son to the doctor's office this last week and watched them try to use some of their software. And I was like, oh, this is the worst.
Yeah. There's a few of those industries where I'm like, hey, come on, let's do this already. That's great.
Exactly.
Well, Nate, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat through this. I think this is going to be really helpful because I know there's a lot of folks from our audience that have talked about, like, I just want some really practical places to get started, really practical places that I can be better at what we're trying to do as a team, as an individual in my role as a product leader. Yeah. And I think this is going to be really helpful for them. So thank you for doing this work. Thanks for the intentionality behind your work. I've experienced seeing how you work, and your intentionality is second to none, maybe. It's very, very thoughtful. So thank you for what you do.
No, I appreciate you having me, and I hope this was helpful for a few people out there. So,
well, there's nothing left to do but roll out the red carpet for you. So let's go ahead. And where can people learn more about you or get connected with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm the only Nate Juraschek out there. If you search for Jurassic, like Jurassic Park, you can kind of find me through that means as well. So
I will never not be able to think of Jurassic Park when I think of you now. That's amazing.
It's my stage name. So
yes. So good.
But yeah, that's the best place to just hit me up there, and happy to connect. And I've got an article or so there, and that's probably where I'll continue to publish things if I do for at least a little while. So my company has a podcast too called Next Level Biz Tech. So if people are really into business technology and digital transformation related kind of components, it's a worthwhile podcast to check out. So I'd say call a few of those things out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, and I appreciate everything you do.
Thanks, George. Talk to you soon.
People of Product is brought to you by Crema, a design consultancy that helps forward-thinking leaders discover, understand, and execute on their greatest opportunities. Learn more at crema.us.